What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm going to be bringing you the Season 1, Episode 5 review of Tron Uprising entitled Identity. And honestly, this episode felt like filler. A lot of this episode felt like filler. It wasn't really relevant in terms of narrative progression, in terms of the overarching conflict between the occupation in Argon City and Beck, so it wasn't relevant in that aspect. And then on top of it, like, several times in this episode, there were just contrived plot devices. There would just be very, very convenient resolutions to intractable plot points. And I was just like, okay, whatever. The one thing that kind of redeemed this episode, however, was the ending, when we got some good characterization for Tron and a little bit of insight on his backstory. So this episode picks off right where the last one picked up off. And that was with Beck realizing that Tesla is trying to use propaganda against him in order to have Argon City be against the Renegade, or the new Tron, as it were. So Beck takes off his suit, and I think he's in a train station. He's in a train station, and he's about to hop on a train. However, there's a security checkpoint. And what's happening is that at the security checkpoint, I don't even know what you call them. I guess the forces, Tesla's forces, if you will, are scanning identity discs. And the identity disc, and I didn't even know this is what they were called. I'm not even sure this is what they were called in the original Tron. The disc that they use to fight with, those boomerang type discs, they're called identity discs in this incarnation of Tron. And again, I'm not sure if that's what they were originally called in the original Tron, but in any event, the identity disc is something that stores all the information about you, that stores all of your experiences, anything that you know. That's why it's called an identity disc. It's basically your identity. And so if Tesla's forces can scan this identity disc, then they'll realize who Beck is. They'll realize that he's the renegade, and his, everything will be up and out in the open at that point. So what happens is, as Beck is getting closer and closer to this checkpoint, obviously he's becoming apprehensive. He doesn't want to go through the checkpoint, and another program sees how apprehensive Beck is, and he offers to help him. And so Beck winds up getting his identity disc stolen by this program, this random program who offers to help him get around the security checkpoint. And this is very bad for Beck, as we learn as the episode continues, because if you lose your identity disc, then it will eventually result in permanent amnesia. So you won't remember who you are, you won't remember anything about your life, none of your experiences. You'll just be in a permanent state of amnesia. So he has to get his identity disc back from this guy who's stolen it from him. And the major plot hole of this episode is that it's never really explained why someone would want to steal another program's identity disc. And apparently there's an entire black market for this. Maybe I missed that in this episode, but I don't think there was ever any real explanation for why someone would want to steal another program's identity disc. So, but that was the basic premise of this entire episode, was Tron and Beck trying to get back Beck's stolen identity disc. And this involves some plot twists and some contrived plot devices and whatever. I'm not going to go over that, but they eventually wind up getting the identity disc back. So for me, this episode was, in terms of plot, it wasn't that well written. But there was a couple of things that were very interesting to me. And one of those things was that the setting for this episode was outside of Argon City. So we actually get to see other aspects of the grid. And the main place where this plot takes place is in Purgos, a city called Purgos. And something that was very, very interesting to me was that, well, first of all, Tron and Beck head to Purgos because I guess Purgos is a city known for having a black market in identity discs. So their best bet to get Beck's identity disc back is to search the black market in Purgos. But when Tron and Beck are traveling to Purgos, Tron says something very interesting. He says that before the war in the grid that's sort of taking over the grid, he says that Purgos used to be a boom town, but now it's a garbage heap. And this obviously leads to other interesting questions, which is, does the grid actually have economies? I mean, of course, we've seen some episodes where some programs are working, like Beck works at Abe's garage, and you see programs at nightclubs, but do they actually have complex economies like we see in the real world? So my question is, how similar is the grid to the real world? And maybe someone has seen the original Tron and they can explain this to me, but that just seems interesting, but very, very weird. I mean, is the grid supposed to be an exact replication of the real world? Is that how this is supposed to work out? So not really sure about that, but in any event, oh, and another question I have is why was the grid made this way? I thought the original Tron was about a computer programmer who tried to create the perfect computer program. I wasn't aware that he tried to replicate the real world, or maybe I'm wrong about that. But in any event, this episode is obviously just a metaphor for Beck's identity crisis that he's going to, having to deal with the consequences of Argon City potentially being turned against him as the new Tron, and also him having to deal with the fact that, again, he's extremely isolated in his heroism. And so that's pretty much what this whole plot was. It was just a metaphor for the fact that Beck is struggling with his new identity as Tron. And so I guess some redeeming features of this episode was, even though it wasn't that well written, it does serve as a metaphor for Beck's identity crisis. And like I said, it does give us some insight on some characterization with respect to Tron. So one of the motifs of this episode was friendship, and that's a sort of carryover from the last episode as well. So even though Tron has been training Beck to be the next Tron and to fight against the occupation in Argon City, the relationship between Tron, and we saw this even since the prologue, the relationship between Tron and Beck has been a little bit icy. They're not friends. They don't have very warm relations with each other. It's very professional and very businesslike. It seems like Tron has wanted to keep Beck at arm's length. And so Tron has been very unwilling to claim that Beck is his friend. But there's one point in this episode where Beck does lose his memory. And so as a result, he loses his identity. And Tron is forced to, come right out and say that, Beck, you are my friend. Try to remember who I am. Typical cliche stuff. Although, again, it does lend some characterization to Tron. But he has to go through this whole thing where he has to try and get Beck to remember who he is. And one thing that Tron says after this whole ordeal is that the reason why he doesn't say it in exactly these terms, but we're led to believe this, it's implied, that the reason why Tron was so unwilling to be friends with Beck rather than just keep that sort of relationship between mentor and apprentice was because he said that he got tricked like that in the past, obviously alluding to his fight with Clue. And he said that one thing that fight with Clue taught him was that friendship can blind you. It can make you imprudent. And so this is a sort of way of us, of the viewers, and also Beck as well, being able to identify with Tron and being able to gain some insight into his psychology and into his characterization. And so this episode really lays the groundwork for a new level, a new level. Not like that. I don't want to word it like that. How do I want to put this? Where the relationship between Tron and Beck reach a new level of friendship. So that's what this episode was about. And also, let me just talk about the Zed subplot. So I previously mentioned in the last episode review my sort of disdain for Zed, and this episode isn't any different. Zed is just an easily manipulable coward. I mean, gosh, I really don't like Zed's character. So Zed got tricked. First, he got tricked by the girl who stole Abe's bike. That was one. Then he gets manipulated into joining Paige's task force to hunt down the renegade. The other people who were supposed to be on that task force sort of use the fact that Zed has low self-esteem against him to get him to join that task force. And then he was manipulated into leaving the task force by Mara. I really don't like his character. I mean, he's just being manipulated and left and right, and I just don't like his character. I just don't like the way the writers have used his character. And not only that, I don't like the fact that he decides not to join the task force. I mean, I thought that was a very, very interesting plot. It would have been a very interesting plot development to produce some conflict between Zed and Beck. And I just don't like that that was resolved so easily. So that's my only real gripe about this whole Zed plot line. I mean, they spent 2 episodes developing a potentially interesting scenario which would have put Zed against Beck as Tron, and then it just gets resolved in this episode very, very quickly. So I really wanted them to take this in a direction where Zed becomes more villainous and the conflict between Zed and Beck really starts to heat up, but they decided not to take that route. So I was a little disappointed in terms of that, but all in all, I think this episode was meh. It was whatever. Like I said, this episode is predicated on a plot hole, although it does allow for some characterization between Beck and Tron and gives us some insight into sort of Tron's thinking in his psychology. But overall, this was a very meh episode. Hopefully, we pick up with some more narrative progression in the next episode, which deals more with the conflict between Beck and the occupation. So this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.